Hello and welcome to Youth in Politics. I'm Justin Chenette. Today's guest is Maine Secretary of State Matthew Dunlap. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
What inspired you into the field of public service?
Wow. That wasn't the question I was expecting. No, it's interesting because having served in both the legislature for 8 years and now I'm in my 5th year as Secretary of State, it's an interesting dialogue among people in public policy as to what gets you into it. And everybody has a different story. Almost no one, me included, ever intended to be in public service. It was like the farthest thing from my mind. I never had any interest in politics. But what got me into it was sort of a roundabout way. I was a cook, and I worked in a large commercial kitchen, and I was in charge of a number of young people who were college students. And one of them was leaving because she didn't have enough money to pay her school bill, and I was an alumni of the institution. I thought I should be doing something about that, so I started trying to put together a scholarship fund for people in emergency situations. And someone said, well, why don't you call the local state representative? Maybe there's some state resources or information or money, you know. So I did, and I talked to our first-term representative named John O'Day from Orono. And long story short, that went nowhere. We could never get enough support, and it was far too complicated of a thing for a cook to be doing. But he and I became very good friends, and I wound up working on his re-election campaign and the subsequent state senate campaigns, which were successful. And later on, he talked me into running for the House myself, and I was elected 4 times and then Secretary of State. So I was really trying to help somebody, and that's 90% of what the business is trying to help people.
On the Maine.gov website, it says in Maine, the Secretary of State oversees one cohesive department made up of 3 distinct bureaus: the Maine State Archives, the Bureau of Corporations, Elections, and Commissions, and the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. As a constitutional officer, the Secretary is elected biennially through joint ballot of the Maine State Legislature and is charged with carrying out the department's diverse responsibilities and unique mission. Describe the mission of the Department of the Secretary of State and what a typical day is like for you.
Well, the second part's easy. There is no typical day. They're all different, and it's hard to really be prepared for what comes up in the course of a day. But when the Constitution was written, the Secretary of State was really charged as being the keeper of the records of the acts of the governor and of the legislature, the record keeper. And that's translated today into the state archives. Tabulating the vote, registering corporations, again keeping records. And then in 1905, when the legislature decided to put plates on cars and keep records of who owned vehicles, it made sense. 3 secretaries of state across the country also do motor vehicles. It makes us the 3 largest such departments in the country. Maine, Illinois, and Michigan are the 3 largest departments of their kind because of the motor vehicle component. Given the time of year, I might have my day completely devoted to elections. 80% of my time could be motor vehicles. We had the incident recently of a threatened shooting in one of our branch offices, which occupied a fair amount of my attention for a day. There were times when we've had vendor issues and computers go down. The archivist may call and say somebody left the back door open. There are insects in the archives. So there really isn't a typical day. It's very fast-paced and be quite exciting. Slow days, you keep in mind the saying that when you don't see anything, you watch out and you take time to check in with people, make sure they have everything they need. So it's a pretty busy organization with a very diverse mission. We touch about 1 million people a day between genealogy, birth records, death records, motor vehicles, driver's licenses, running for office, filing corporate papers, registering a vehicle, getting something notarized. Notaries are agents of the Secretary of State. Just about everything. We do just about everything.
If an average Mainer came up to you and asked, what are the duties and responsibilities of the Secretary of State, what would you say in layman's terms?
Really to assist them through some of the administrative functions that they're most familiar with. Helping them register a vehicle, transfer title of a vehicle, whatever it was they needed. Mostly if somebody asked me, I'd say, well, can you be a little bit more specific? Because I can make people's eyes glaze over very quickly as I start running down the list of things I'm responsible for. And if somebody has something in particular they're curious about, it's almost a shorter answer to say, what is it you're not responsible for? Mm-hmm. And that sounds like a throwaway thing, but obviously we're not responsible for commercial fishing or issuing hunting licenses or that sort of thing, but we do have such a broad diversity of things. when people ask me what the Secretary of State does, sometimes the shorthand answer, like when my sister asked me that question when I got elected, what's the Secretary of State actually do? I said, well, I make the state coffee and answer the state phone. But obviously we do so many different things. I guess you say basically, primarily, we're the record keeper. We register motor vehicles, do driver's licenses, state elections, and file corporate papers. Probably the shortest way I can put it.
Do you carry out those duties and responsibilities through a partisan or nonpartisan lens?
The work is completely nonpartisan. And it's an interesting discussion that we were having nationally about the partisan nature of the Secretary of State. I mean, all of us have D or R or whatever after our name, but the work is not partisan. The selection process perhaps is. But and that really comes up in high relief during the election season, because I'm the chief election officer of the state and I'm a Democrat. I have to be, and that's actually a good thing, by the way. It's not, and there's been calls for it to be nonpartisan, but the fact of the matter is, nonpartisan gives me a lot of leeway to act, because people aren't watching you as closely. The fact that I'm a Democrat, I know full well that the Republicans are watching me like a hungry hawk hovering over a fat mouse, and I better mind my P's and Q's. More to the point, I really truly believe that the elections are for the voters. They're not for the partisan activists or candidates. And that's who we fight for, are the voters. And as long as I keep that in mind, I've managed to stay out of any real serious trouble.
With that, we're going to take a short break, but when Youth in Politics returns, more of our conversations with Maine Secretary of State Matthew Dunlap. Don't go away. And welcome back to Youth in Politics. On December 3rd, 2008, you were elected to the third term as Maine's 47th Secretary of State, and you outlined a number of goals and objectives. And you said, quote, "It's been an exciting time to be Secretary of State, from the upgrades and service at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles to the implementation of the Help America Vote Act and the national discussions over Real ID and corporate formation security to the development of modern digital archive. These are the most sweeping changes in half a century. It's been challenging and sometimes frustrating, but my greatest asset has been the fantastic dedication of the skilled coworkers I have at my side." Let's start to take those outlined goals one by one, starting with what are those upgrades in the service at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles?
Well, it's sort of behind the scenes, and a lot of this work began actually under Secretary of State Bill Diamond some time ago. And the easiest part of it, of course, is working with our employees to improve service, finding ways to better help people, give them better information, so they don't become frustrated in trying to transact business and they don't have sufficient paperwork or the right documentation. And that just takes training. When I say just takes training, I mean it doesn't take technology or money. The technological changes have been quite extraordinary. And every state agency in government has been affected by this, and it's called the migration from the old bull mainframe. And the state of Maine began computerizing many of its services back in the early 60s. And then sometime in the mid-90s, it dawned on everybody that we were still using the same system. And it was quite outdated, and it wasn't going to be able to support everything that we wanted to do. So state agencies at the time were charged with getting off the bull. And they all kind of went off in their own direction, including the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. And now we've learned some lessons from that, and we actually share a lot more information among state agencies than we used to. But that's, in the jargon of motor vehicles, we talk about the migration project, migrating off the old system onto the new system. And it's about a $14, $15 million project. It's been almost 2 decades in the building. The idea is that when it's completed, we're going to have a much better, more seamless computer system to better serve the public with. And we're almost done, actually. At least done with the middle phases of it. The biggest parts are completed. We're now building some smaller pieces along the lines of motor vehicle titles and registrations. We did all the driver's license histories and driver's license services in my first term, and it didn't go very well. If anybody was trying to renew a license back in 2005, they remember sometimes 8, 9, 10-hour wait times in our branch offices, which the computer system was not stable. It made it worse. But what really happened there was actually a symptom of a legislative initiative some decades before, when we went from a 4-year driver's license to a 6-year driver's license. No one ever accounted for the disruption in traffic patterns. And what I mean by that is if you had, after the legislature did that, if you had renewed your license on June 30th, you had a 4-year license. If you renewed it on July 1, you had a 6-year license. Well, then 2 years later, it got very, very quiet in the branch offices around the state. And we didn't know what to do about it, so we laid off staff, and then 2 years go by, and all of a sudden, here they all came at 197% of normal traffic. And that's been a pattern that undulates every 4 to 6 years. And finally, we've gotten our hands around that part of it. So the computer pieces are actually the most visible, but not always the greatest culprit when things go wrong. So that's just the motor vehicle piece. And I think that we've had a lot of success there, and you know that because it's not been in the news.